The stars seemed peaceful that morning. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the endless darkness of space through the main viewing screen. His coffee had grown cold in his hands, but he didn't mind. After 3 months of routine patrol duty, Jake had learned to enjoy these quiet moments. The year was 2387, and the galaxy had been at peace for over 300 years. The Galactic Council made sure of that. 27 different alien species worked together, keeping their weapons locked away and their disagreements settled through long talks and careful treaties. No one fought anymore. No one wanted to risk breaking the peace that had taken so long to build. Jake's ship was one of 12 human vessels in the sector. The USS Defiance was considered advanced by human standards, equipped with experimental quantum phase weapons that most alien species thought were crude and inefficient. Humans had only joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago, making them the newest members. Most aliens saw them as useful workers, but not much else. They were good at mining asteroids and building space stations, but they lacked the wisdom and technology of the older civilizations. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park entered the bridge, carrying a datapad filled with routine reports. She was one of the few humans who worked directly with the Council, serving as a communications officer between Earth and the alien governments. Lisa had spent years learning alien languages and customs, trying to help humanity find its place among the stars. "Morning, Captain," Lisa said, settling into her chair at the communications station. "The Council's daily briefing is starting in 20 minutes. Same as always. Trade agreements, mining rights, and territorial boundaries." Jake nodded. The Council meetings were usually boring affairs. The alien representatives would spend hours discussing the smallest details of their agreements, making sure nothing could possibly lead to conflict. It was effective, but Jake sometimes wondered if they had become too careful, too afraid to take any risks. The peaceful morning was shattered when Ensign Steve Murphy burst onto the bridge, his face pale with shock. Steve was young, barely out of the academy, and he had been monitoring the long-range sensors from his post in the communications center. "Captain, you need to see this," Steve said, his voice shaking. "We're receiving emergency broadcasts from the Andara system. Multiple distress signals." Jake set down his coffee cup and moved to the sensor station. The Andara system was 3 light-years away, home to several peaceful colonies with a combined population of over 40 million beings from various species. It was considered one of the safest places in the galaxy. "Put it on screen," Jake ordered. The main viewer flickered to life, showing grainy images transmitted from the Andara colonies. What Jake saw made his blood run cold. Massive alien ships, unlike anything in the Council database, were attacking the orbital stations. These vessels were dark and organic-looking, as if they had been grown rather than built. Energy weapons lanced out from the strange ships, cutting through the colony defenses like paper. "Dear God," Lisa whispered. "Who are they?" Steve's fingers flew over his console as he searched the military database. "I'm getting partial matches, Captain. The computer thinks these might be Kethvar vessels." Jake felt his stomach drop. Every human military officer knew about the Kethvar, though most had hoped never to encounter them. They were a nomadic warrior race from the outer rim of the galaxy, known for their brutal efficiency and conquest. The Kethvar had been expanding their territory for thousands of years, consuming entire worlds and enslaving populations. Most species considered them a myth, a scary story used to frighten children. "How many ships?" Jake asked. "Over 200, sir. And they're not stopping with the orbital defenses. They're bombarding the surface colonies." On the screen, Jake could see the results of that bombardment. Cities that had stood for centuries were burning. Evacuation ships were trying to escape, but many were being shot down by Kethvar fighters. The aliens weren't just conquering the colonies, they were destroying them completely. "Get me Admiral Carter at Fleet Headquarters," Jake ordered. "Emergency priority." While Steve worked to establish the connection, Lisa monitored the Council communications channels. What she heard made her heart sink. The alien representatives were in panic. Emergency sessions were being called, but instead of organizing a defense, they seemed to be discussing how to protect themselves. Admiral Ben Carter's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. Carter was an old soldier who had served in the human colonial wars before joining the Galactic Fleet. He understood warfare in ways that most of the peaceful aliens could not. "I'm watching the feeds from Andara, Jake," Carter said before anyone could speak. "It's as bad as it looks. The Kethvar haven't been seen in this sector for over a century. The last time they attacked, they consumed 3 entire star systems before disappearing back to the rim. What are our orders, sir? Carter was quiet for a moment. Officially, we're supposed to wait for the Council to decide on a response. Unofficially, I'm moving every available ship to the sector boundary. If the Council chooses to act, we'll be ready. The connection ended, leaving Jake and his crew to watch the destruction continue on their screens. The Kethvar ships moved with terrifying coordination, like a pack of predators that had done this countless times before. They targeted evacuation ships first, then communication arrays, then power stations. It was systematic, efficient, and utterly ruthless. Hours passed. The distress signals from Andara grew weaker as more communication stations were destroyed. Jake found himself pacing the bridge, unable to sit still while innocent people died just 3 light years away. His crew watched the screens in growing horror, seeing cities burn and ships explode in the cold darkness of space. Finally, Lisa received word from the Council. Their emergency session had concluded. Jake gathered his senior officers around the communication station to hear the decision that would shape the galaxy's response to this crisis. The Galactic Council has voted, Lisa announced, her voice heavy with disbelief. They've decided to implement protective isolation protocols. They're sealing off the Andara system and declaring it a quarantine zone. Any ship attempting to enter or leave will be turned away. The bridge fell silent. Jake stared at Lisa, unable to believe what he had heard. They're abandoning them? The Council believes that engaging the Kethvar would only provoke them to attack other systems. They think isolation is the safest option for the galaxy as a whole. Jake felt anger building in his chest. 40 million innocent beings were about to be slaughtered or enslaved, and the galactic government's response was to look the other way. The very council that claimed to represent justice and civilization was choosing to sacrifice an entire star system to save themselves. What was the vote? Jake asked quietly. Lisa checked her datapad. 26 species voted for isolation. 1 voted against. Jake didn't need to ask which species had cast the dissenting vote. In that moment, he understood that humanity's place in the galaxy was about to change forever. Admiral Ben Carter stood in the war room at Luna Base, staring at the holographic display showing the Andara system. Red dots marked the positions of Kethvar ships, while blue dots showed what remained of the colony defenses. There weren't many blue dots left. Around the table sat the commanders of every human ship within 50 light years. Captain Jake Morrison had arrived an hour ago with the USS Defiance. Captain Amy Torres commanded the medical vessel USS Sanctuary. Lieutenant Commander Steve Murphy had been given temporary command of the destroyer USS Vigilance after its captain was injured in a training accident. 12 ships total, with a combined crew of just over 8,000 people. The Council's decision is final, Carter announced to his officers. They will not interfere with the Kethvar attack on Andara. As of 2 hours ago, the system has been declared off-limits to all Council vessels. Captain Torres leaned forward in her chair. Amy was a doctor before she became a ship commander, and the idea of abandoning millions of innocent people clearly disturbed her. Sir, my ship is equipped with advanced medical facilities and evacuation pods. We could save thousands of lives if we move quickly. And face court-martial when we return, replied Commander Lisa Park, who had been promoted to serve as Carter's liaison with the Council. The aliens are scared, Admiral. I've been monitoring their communications. They remember what happened the last time someone fought the Kethvar. Entire fleets were destroyed. Carter nodded grimly. He had spent the morning reviewing historical records of Kethvar attacks. The pattern was always the same. Overwhelming force, complete destruction, and then disappearance back to the outer rim. No species had ever successfully defended against them. The Zephyrians lost 12 crystal ships the last time, Carter continued. The Nerians had an entire biofleet consumed. Every species that tried to fight was beaten so badly they needed decades to recover. That's why the Council won't act. They're terrified. Jake Morrison spoke up from across the table. What about us, sir? Are we terrified too? The room fell silent. Carter looked around at his officers, seeing the same expression on every face. These were people who had volunteered to serve in space, knowing the dangers. They had signed up to protect Earth's colonies and help humanity find its place among the stars. None of them had expected to face a choice like this. Dr. Rachel Kim, the fleet's chief scientist, activated her datapad and projected new images onto the holographic display. Rachel had spent years studying alien technology, and her work had helped develop humanity's experimental weapons systems. "I've been analyzing the sensor data from the HFY ships," Rachel announced. "Their vessels are biomechanical, grown rather than built. They're incredibly tough and well-armed, but they have a weakness. They rely on a hive-mind communication network to coordinate their attacks." She highlighted several structures on the HFY ships, inorganic-looking towers that pulsed with energy. "These are network nodes. If we could disrupt enough of them, we might be able to break their coordination. The problem is that they're heavily defended, and you'd have to get very close to target them effectively." Commander Murphy, the youngest officer in the room, studied the tactical display. Steve had graduated at the top of his class at the academy, specializing in small ship operations and guerrilla tactics. "Our destroyers are fast and maneuverable. We could get in close if we used hit-and-run tactics." "Against 200 ships?" Lisa asked. "Steve, I've seen the combat reports. Each HFY vessel is larger and more powerful than our biggest battleship. We'd be destroyed in the first engagement." Carter walked over to the display, studying the tactical situation. The HFY had formed a loose sphere around the Andara system, with their largest ships stationed near the main colonies. Their formation was designed for conquest, not defense. They clearly didn't expect any serious resistance. "What's the status of our experimental weapons?" Carter asked. Rachel brightened slightly. "The quantum phase cannons are operational on all 12 ships. They're untested in real combat, but the theory is sound. Instead of using energy or kinetic force, they disrupt matter at the molecular level. Traditional shields won't stop them. But they require enormous amounts of power. Each ship can probably fire 3 or 4 times before the reactors need to be shut down for cooling. After that, we'd be using conventional weapons only." Carter continued staring at the display. 40 million innocent beings were trapped in that system, facing death or slavery. The galactic government had abandoned them to save itself. In a few hours, there might be no one left to save. "Sir," Jake Morrison said quietly, "I have a question." "Go ahead, Captain. When I joined the colonial fleet, I took an oath." "We all did." "Do you remember what it said?" Carter smiled grimly. He remembered the oath very well. Every human officer recited it during their commissioning ceremony. "To protect the innocent, defend the helpless, and stand against tyranny wherever it may be found." "It didn't say anything about protecting only humans," Jake continued. "It didn't say we should only help when it was safe or convenient." Captain Torres nodded in agreement. "My medical oath was similar. First, do no harm, but sometimes doing nothing is the greatest harm of all." One by one, the other commanders voiced their support. Even Lisa Park, despite her concerns about the political consequences, admitted that she couldn't stand by and watch a genocide take place. Carter looked around the room at these men and women who were volunteering for what might be a suicide mission. They weren't the most advanced species in the galaxy. They didn't have the most powerful weapons or the largest ships, but they had something the other species seemed to have lost: the courage to do what was right regardless of the cost. "Dr. Kim," Carter said finally, "how long would it take to modify our weapons systems for maximum effectiveness against their network nodes?" Rachel's fingers flew over her datapad as she ran calculations. 6 hours, maybe 7. We'd need to reroute power from secondary systems and recalibrate the targeting computers. Do it. All ships are to begin immediate preparations for departure. We leave for Andara in 8 hours. Lisa Park stood up, her face pale. "Admiral, I need to remind you that this action directly violates Council orders. We could all face charges of mutiny and war crimes." Carter walked over to the communications console and activated the fleet-wide channel. His voice would now be heard on every human ship in the sector. "This is Admiral Carter to all vessels. In 1 hour, I will be requesting volunteers for a mission to the Andara system. This mission is not sanctioned by the Galactic Council. It will be dangerous, probably suicidal, and anyone who participates will likely face court-martial if they survive. Any ship commander who wishes to decline this mission may do so without prejudice." He paused, looking around at his officers. "However, I cannot stand by and watch 40 million innocent people die while we hide behind bureaucratic excuses. If the galaxy's government won't act, then we will. We're going to show the HFY that someone still has the courage to fight for what's right." Carter closed the channel and turned back to his commanders. "You have your orders. Begin preparations immediately. As the officers filed out of the war room to ready their ships, Carter remained behind with the tactical display. The red dots representing HFY ships seemed to pulse like heartbeats, counting down the time left for the people of Andara. In 6 hours, 12 human ships would enter that system against impossible odds. Carter knew they might all die, but he also knew that some things were worth dying for. The galaxy was about to learn what humans did when someone threatened the innocent. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Andara system, and what they saw made everyone fall silent. 3 of the 5 colony worlds were already dark, their cities nothing but glowing craters. Debris from destroyed ships drifted through space like metallic snow. The HFY fleet had spread throughout the system like a disease, their biomechanical ships pulsing with alien energy. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the enemy formation through his tactical display. 212 HFY vessels, ranging from fighters the size of shuttles to massive command ships that dwarfed human battleships. Each one looked like it had been grown in some nightmare laboratory, all curves and organic surfaces that seemed to breathe. "My God," whispered Ensign Steve Murphy from his position at the sensor station. "Look at the size of those things." The largest HFY ships were over 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that glowed like infected wounds. Even their smallest vessels outgunned anything in the human fleet. It was like bringing knives to a nuclear war. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Sarah Davis from Communications, "we're receiving a transmission from the remaining colonies on Andara Prime and Andara 7. Approximately 15 million survivors are still alive, but their defenses are failing." Jake activated the fleet communication channel. "All ships, this is Morrison. Remember the plan. We hit the network nodes, disrupt their coordination, and buy time for the evacuation ships. Stay mobile, stay together, and don't try to be heroes." Captain Amy Torres responded from the USS Sanctuary. "Jake, I'm reading massive HFY formations between us and the colonies. My ship isn't built for combat. That's why you're staying back until we clear a path, Amy. Your job is to save lives, not fight battles." Dr. Rachel Kim's voice crackled over the intercom from the weapons systems bay. "Quantum phase cannons are charged and ready. Remember, we only get 3 or 4 shots before the reactors overheat. Make them count." The HFY had noticed the human fleet. Several of their ships were turning toward the newcomers, their weapons beginning to glow with threatening energy. Jake could see smaller fighter craft launching from the larger vessels, swarming toward the human formation like angry insects. "Here they come," announced Steve Murphy. 60 fighters incoming with 3 cruiser-class ships behind them. Jake took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would determine whether humanity's intervention was heroic or simply suicidal. "All ships engage at will. Target those network nodes whenever possible." The battle began exactly as everyone had feared. The HFY fighters opened fire first, their weapons tearing through space with beams of crimson energy. The human ships scattered, using their superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the initial assault. But several vessels took hits that would have destroyed smaller craft. The USS Vigilance, under Commander Murphy's leadership, dove straight into the enemy formation. Steve had spent years studying unconventional tactics, and he put that knowledge to work now. Instead of trading shots with the larger HFY ships, he targeted their fighters, using the Vigilance's speed to hit and run before the enemy could respond effectively. "Direct hit on a network node," Rachel reported, as one of her quantum phase shots struck a HFY cruiser. "Their formation is showing signs of disruption." But the victory was short-lived. The HFY adapted quickly, and their return fire was devastating. The USS Courage took a direct hit to its engine section, forcing Captain Linda Scott to fall back with emergency power only. 2 more human ships reported critical damage within the first 10 minutes of combat. Jake realized they were fighting the battle wrong. The HFY expected traditional space warfare, ships lining up and shooting at each other until one side was destroyed. But humans had learned different lessons from their history of warfare on Earth. "All ships, new orders," Jake announced. "Stop fighting like this is a formal duel. We're guerrilla fighters now. Hit them where they don't expect it, then get out before they can respond." The human tactics began to change. Instead of engaging in direct combat, they used asteroid fields and debris clouds for cover. They targeted supply ships and communication relays instead of the most heavily armed vessels. Most importantly, They refused to stay in one place long enough for the Kethvar to bring their superior firepower to bear. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ross, Jake's second in command, coordinated the new battle plan from her position at the tactical station. Elena had studied every major space battle in human history, and she applied those lessons now. The Kethvar are used to enemies who fight conventionally. They don't know how to respond to chaos. The strategy began to work. Human ships darted in and out of the enemy formation, striking at network nodes and then disappearing before the Kethvar could mount an effective counterattack. Each successful hit disrupted the alien coordination a little more, causing confusion in their ranks, but the human fleet was taking casualties. The USS Defiant lost its port weapons array to a lucky Kethvar shot. The destroyer USS Ranger was forced to withdraw when its life support systems were damaged. They were winning small victories but losing the larger battle. Then something unexpected happened. Captain Torres, who was supposed to stay back with the medical ship, broke formation and headed directly toward the colonies. The USS Sanctuary wasn't designed for combat. It was a hospital ship with minimal weapons and armor. But Torres had seen something on the sensor readings that the military commanders had missed. "Amy, what are you doing?" Jake demanded over the communication channel. "There are evacuation ships trapped near Andara Prime," Torres replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Civilian transports with no weapons and failing engines. They'll all be killed if I don't reach them." The USS Sanctuary dove toward the planet, dodging Kethvar fighters and weapon blasts. Torres had trained as a combat medic before becoming a ship's doctor, and those skills served her well now. She flew her ungainly hospital ship like a fighter pilot, somehow avoiding destruction as she reached the stranded evacuation vessels. While Torres coordinated the rescue operation, the rest of the human fleet continued their desperate battle against overwhelming odds. Steve Murphy's USS Vigilance had taken so much damage that half its systems were offline, but he kept fighting with whatever weapons still functioned. Rachel Kim's quantum phase cannons had overheated, forcing the fleet to rely on conventional weapons that barely scratched the Kethvar armor. The turning point came when Jake realized they weren't just fighting a battle, they were sending a message. Every human ship was broadcasting on all frequencies, including civilian channels. They weren't just shooting at the enemy, they were talking to the trapped populations, coordinating rescue efforts, offering hope where none had existed before. Across the galaxy, other species monitored these transmissions with growing amazement. The humans weren't just fighting, they were sacrificing themselves to save people they had never met from species they barely understood. It was behavior that the older civilizations had forgotten was possible. After 18 hours of continuous combat, the human fleet was down to 7 operational ships. All were damaged. Most were critically low on ammunition, and their crews were exhausted beyond measure. But they had accomplished something no other species thought possible. They had hurt the Kethvar, disrupted their formation, and saved over 50,000 civilian lives. As Jake surveyed the tactical display, he saw that the Kethvar fleet was repositioning, preparing for what would probably be the final assault that would destroy the remaining human ships. But he also saw something else. Distant sensor contacts at the edge of the system. Ships were approaching Andara, lots of them. The galaxy had been watching, and finally, after 3 centuries of peace, other species were remembering what it meant to fight for something worth protecting. Captain Jake Morrison watched the sensor display with growing disbelief as dozens of new contacts appeared at the edge of the Andara system. The ships emerging from hyperspace weren't human. They were alien vessels from species that had voted to abandon the system just hours before. The first to arrive were the Zephyrians, their crystal ships gleaming like diamonds against the darkness of space. Behind them came the aquatic Nereians in their bioluminescent vessels that pulsed with blue-green light. The insectoid Vex Collective followed with their geometric swarm ships. And then came species after species that Jake had only read about in diplomatic reports. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ross looked up from her tactical station, her face streaked with sweat and exhaustion. "Sir, I'm reading 47 ships and counting. They're taking positions around the Kethvar fleet." On the communication channels, messages were flooding in from the arriving fleets. The voices belonged to alien commanders who had spent their entire careers avoiding conflict, now speaking words that would have been unthinkable just days before. "Human vessels, this is Zephyrian Fleet Commander Zarthek. We have come to assist." Your species has shown us what courage means. This is Narration Deep Singer Kalara. Our pods are ready for battle. We will not let the Kethvar complete their harvest. Vex primary node acknowledging. The collective has decided. We fight together now. Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. These species had watched humanity sacrifice itself for people they barely knew, and it had awakened something in them that had been sleeping for centuries. The careful, peaceful galaxy was remembering how to be brave. Dr. Rachel Kim's voice came over the intercom from the damaged weapon systems bay. Jake, the quantum phase cannons are back online, but we've only got power for one more shot. After that, the reactor will need a full rebuild. Jake nodded, studying the tactical situation. The Kethvar fleet was now surrounded by over 60 allied ships, but they still outnumbered the combined force. More importantly, the Kethvar had centuries of combat experience while most of the alien species hadn't fought a real war in generations. The battle resumed with a fury that shook the entire system. The Kethvar, faced with organized resistance for the first time in their recorded history, responded with desperate violence. Their biomechanical ships unleashed weapons that turned space itself into a killing field of energy and plasma. But something had changed. The Allied fleets weren't fighting like the scattered, terrified civilizations the Kethvar remembered. They were coordinating their attacks, using tactics learned from watching the human broadcasts. When Zephyrian crystal ships took damage, Nerian vessels moved to cover them. When Vex swarm ships ran low on ammunition, human destroyers shared their supplies. Commander Amy Torres, still coordinating rescue operations with the USS Sanctuary, found herself working with alien medical teams she had never trained with. A Nerian healer named Silquen helped her evacuate wounded from a damaged Zephyrian ship, while Vex repair drones assisted with emergency surgeries on beings they had never seen before. The coordination wasn't perfect. Species that had never fought together struggled to communicate in the chaos of battle. But they were learning, adapting, becoming something new. For the first time in galactic history, the peaceful civilizations were acting like a united military force. The crisis came when the Kethvar command ship, a massive vessel nearly 3 kilometers long, targeted the remaining civilian evacuation transports. The alien commander had realized that destroying the people they were trying to save would break the morale of the defending fleets. Jake saw the danger on his tactical display. The Kethvar flagship was charging a weapon that could destroy all the evacuation ships with a single shot. The Allied fleets were too far away to intercept in time. Only the USS Defiance was in position to stop the attack, but Jake's ship was already critically damaged. "Elena," Jake said quietly to his second-in-command, "how much power do we have left in the reactor?" Elena checked her readouts, her face pale. "Enough for one quantum phase shot, like Rachel said. But, sir, if we channel all remaining power through the weapons array, the feedback will destroy the ship. The reactor containment can't handle that kind of surge." Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. These people had volunteered to come to Andorra knowing they might not return. They had fought for 18 hours against impossible odds, and now they had a chance to save millions of lives at the cost of their own. Before Jake could give the order, something unprecedented happened across the Allied fleet. Ship after ship began volunteering to make the same sacrifice. Zephyrian Commander Zarthek offered to ram his crystal vessel into the Kethvar flagship. Narration Deep Singer Kalara prepared to overload her bioluminescent reactor. Dozens of alien commanders who had spent their careers avoiding risks suddenly competed to see who could sacrifice themselves most effectively. "No," Jake announced over the fleet communication channel. "This is our fight. We started it, we'll finish it." But as the USS Defiance prepared for its final attack, the Kethvar flagship began to change course. The massive vessel was turning away from the evacuation ships, its weapons powering down. Across the Kethvar fleet, other ships were also withdrawing, falling back toward the edge of the system. On the communication channels, a new voice appeared, deep, alien, and speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. "I am War Leader Cathamore of the Harvest Fleet. In 3,000 cycles of conquest, we have never faced resistance like this. You fight not for territory or resources, but for others who cannot fight for themselves. This is behavior we do not understand." The Kethvar commander paused, and when he continued, there was something like respect in his voice. "The small ship humans have shown courage that matches our greatest warriors. The crystal singers risk their harmony for strangers. The water dancers leave their deep places to fight in the void. The hive builders act without consensus. This unity is new to us. Jake found himself speaking for the entire Allied fleet. We're not asking you to understand, war leader. We're asking you to leave. These people are under our protection now. Protection, the Cathavar repeated as if testing the word. Yes, we see this now. You are not prey herders or territory holders. You are something else. Something dangerous to us. The Cathavar fleet continued its withdrawal, but their commander had one final message. Know this, protector fleets. We have marked this system as defended ground. We will not return here, but know also that others will test your resolve. Can you protect all the weak ones in this galaxy? Can you fight every battle that comes? Jake looked around at the mixed fleet of battered, damaged ships. Human vessels flew alongside alien craft that had been enemies or strangers just days before. They had lost good people in this battle. But they had also gained something precious, proof that courage was contagious, that the galaxy's species could work together when it mattered. We'll find out, Jake replied to the Cathavar commander, one battle at a time. As the enemy fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the survivors began the long work of rescue and recovery. But everyone knew that something fundamental had changed. The galaxy would never be the same again. 6 months after the Battle of Andara, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Alliance Defense Station, watching ships from dozens of species working together to rebuild what the Cathavar had destroyed. The station orbited Andara Prime, built from the wreckage of both human and alien vessels that had been lost in the battle. Jake still felt strange wearing the rank insignia of an admiral. The promotion had come with his appointment as the first human commander in the newly formed Galactic Defense Alliance. The old council had been dissolved within days of the battle, replaced by a military organization that put protection above politics. Dr. Rachel Kim joined him at the observation window, carrying a datapad filled with technical reports. Rachel now served as the Alliance's chief technology officer, overseeing the integration of human and alien technologies. Her quantum phase weapons were being installed on ships throughout the galaxy, but only after each species agreed to use them solely for defense. The Zephyrians have finished installing the new communication arrays, Rachel reported. All Alliance ships can now coordinate in real time, regardless of their species of origin. We won't have the communication problems we faced during the battle. Jake nodded, watching a Narration bioship dock with a human transport vessel. The sight still amazed him. Species that had barely spoken to each other for centuries now worked side by side as if they had been allies forever. Commander Elena Ross approached from the command center, her face showing the stress of managing the most complex military operation in galactic history. Elena had been promoted to serve as Jake's chief of staff. Coordinating between human forces and their alien allies, sir. We've received reports from 3 more systems requesting Alliance protection, Elena announced. The Margot colony, the Vegan trade hub, and the research stations in the Kepler sector. Apparently, word is spreading that there's finally someone willing to stand up to raiders and pirates. Jake smiled grimly. The Cathavar commander had been right. Now that the galaxy knew protection was possible, everyone wanted it. The Alliance was growing faster than anyone had expected, but so were the responsibilities that came with it. Captain Amy Torres materialized on the communication screen, transmitting from the USS Sanctuary 2, which was now serving as the flagship of the Alliance medical fleet. Amy had become something of a legend among alien species after her rescue operations during the battle, and she now commanded a fleet of hospital ships crewed by beings from over 20 different species. Jake, we've got good news from the Andara colonies, Amy reported. The population is back up to 38 million, and the new settlements are thriving. More importantly, we're seeing something we've never seen before. Mixed colonies where multiple species are choosing to live together. On Andara Prime, humans worked alongside Zephyrians in crystal-growing facilities. Narration engineers helped design underwater cities that could house both aquatic and air-breathing species. The Vex Collective had established manufacturing centers that employed workers from a dozen different civilizations. It was as if the shared experience of nearly losing everything had taught the galaxy's species how to truly cooperate. Commander Steve Murphy entered the observation deck, now wearing the uniform of an Alliance tactical instructor. Steve had been put in charge of training the new generation of mixed-species military units, teaching alien officers the guerrilla tactics that had proven so effective against the HFY. The latest class of cadets graduated yesterday, Steve announced proudly. 63 beings from 18 different species, all trained in human military doctrine but adapted for their unique abilities. The Zephyrian crystal singers can coordinate fleet movements through harmonic resonance. The Vex drones can perform repairs under fire that would be impossible for individual beings. The Nerians can operate in environments where other species would die. Jake turned away from the window to face his senior staff. These people had become more than just military officers. They were the architects of a new galactic order. What's the status of the council replacement? Elena consulted her datapad. The Alliance Charter has been signed by 41 species so far. Commander Lisa Park is doing excellent work as the first Secretary General, but the political integration is much slower than the military cooperation. Lisa Park had been the natural choice to lead the civilian government of the Alliance. Her years of experience working with alien species through the Old Council gave her insights that pure military officers lacked. But she faced the enormous challenge of creating a government that could represent dozens of different civilizations with completely different values and needs. The important thing is that it's working, Jake said. 6 months ago, if pirates attacked a colony, they could count on the local government being too afraid to fight back. Now they know that an Alliance fleet will arrive within days and we won't negotiate with criminals. The transformation hadn't been without problems. Some species struggled with the concept of preemptive defense. Others worried that the Alliance was becoming too militaristic, too willing to use force to solve problems. But the results spoke for themselves. Piracy was down 60% across the galaxy, and slavers like the HFY were avoiding Alliance space entirely. Rachel activated a holographic display showing the current disposition of Alliance forces. We now have over 300 ships from 28 species under unified command. The quantum phase technology has been successfully integrated with Zephyrian crystal matrices, Nerian bioluminescent systems, and Vex collective processing units. Each ship is more powerful than anything that existed before the Alliance. But Jake knew that weapons weren't what had really changed the galaxy. The real transformation was in the minds of beings who had spent centuries believing that peace meant never fighting, even when fighting was necessary to protect the innocent. A communication alert sounded, and Lisa Park's image appeared on the main screen. Lisa was transmitting from the new Alliance headquarters on Earth, where representatives from dozens of species worked together in a building that had once been the Human Colonial Administration Center. Jake, I have news from the Outer Rim, Lisa announced. Our long-range scouts have detected movement in HFY territory. It looks like they're consolidating their forces, possibly preparing for a major campaign. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The HFY had kept their word and stayed away from Alliance space, but that didn't mean they had given up conquest entirely. They were probably looking for easier targets, species that hadn't yet joined the Alliance and couldn't call for help. How long before they move? Jake asked. Unknown, but our analysts think we have months, not years. The question is whether we're prepared to extend Alliance protection to species that haven't formally joined us. It was the question that had haunted Jake since accepting command of the Alliance forces. How far were they willing to go? How many battles were they prepared to fight? The galaxy was vast, and there would always be someone somewhere who needed protection. Jake looked around at his staff, humans and aliens who had learned to work together, fight together, and trust each other with their lives. 6 months ago, most of these species had never cooperated on anything more complex than a trade agreement. Now they were planning joint military operations across multiple star systems. Send a message to all Alliance fleets, Jake decided. Begin preparation for extended operations. If the HFY want to test our resolve again, we'll be ready for them. As his staff dispersed to carry out their orders, Jake remained at the observation window, watching the mixed fleet of Alliance ships patrol the Andara system. Humans had taught the galaxy how to fight for what was right, but the other species had taught humanity something equally valuable, that they didn't have to face the darkness alone. The galaxy had learned to be brave again, and that made all the difference. Outside the station, a formation of mixed fighters flew past, human pilots flying alongside Zephyrian crystal singers, Nerian deep swimmers, and Vex collective drones. They were heading out on patrol, ready to respond to any threat against the innocent. The age of hiding from evil was over. The age of standing against it had begun.